Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to express, as ever, sincere thanks to all of our wonderful guests who shared their time with me during season 11. I'd also like to thank, importantly, all of you, our listeners, spanning right across the globe. I really appreciate the time that you take to listen to the conversations that I have with these wonderful guests. I have an appeal. We continue to keep the podcast sponsor free, which I know is important to you. And we produce it at our own cost. So if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please take 10 seconds now to do that, as it really helps the show and the quality of guests as we continue to attract. And I have an appeal. We continue to keep the podcast sponsor free and produce it at our own cost. So if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please, can you take 10 seconds now to do that, as it really helps the show and the quality of guests we continue to attract. As ever, a huge thanks to you all for all the positive feedback through social media. And if you're enjoying the podcast, why not subscribe to our ScaleX Insider 321 newsletter, where each week we provide you with 3 timeless takeaways, 2 inspirational quotes, and 1 reflection question to support your scaling psyche. Now, without further ado, Claire, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
It's incredible, isn't it? We're now into the end of February. 2024 is disappearing, and it's been some 12 weeks since we last spoke. So how are you?
Oh, I'm great. I can't believe this is wrap up 11. As I was saying to you earlier, you'd think I knew what I was doing by this point.
Yes, it's been an incredible journey. 110 conversations at this point with our guests. So much information to take in. And I'm reminded, as I say, that a lot of the time we feel that we know what to do, but rarely do we do what we know. And I think there's a theme emerging in that context in this season. So what were your reflections from season 11?
Brendan, just before I go into my reflections, you make an appeal every episode to ask people to subscribe. And I would actually follow up with that appeal by asking anyone who has any responsibility for developing leadership teams to listen to each season over a period of time, and then to regroup together to discuss what everybody's learnings are and what essentially they can do differently as a result of what they've heard, and collectively to hold each other to account each time they come together, because there's exceptional learning in every single season that you record. There's just so much gold. So use it, and use it wisely, because frankly, it's better than any leadership development program that you could actually go out and simply buy off the shelf. So an absolutely fantastic way to grow together as one team and to continue to share learnings, observations, and really get all those practical nuggets that you can implement into your business and hold each other to account.
I love that, Claire, and I just add to that, it reminds me, I listen to a lot of Jim Rohn, the late great Jim Rohn, who Tony Robbins would credit with much of his development, his material. And it was Jim Rohn who said, stand guard at the door of your own mind. And he was a huge advocate of encouraging people not to listen to the news, not to watch the news. It's in the media's interest to gather your attention, and they do that, of course, by reporting negative news. And in the context of scaling, you have to ask yourself, is that news conducive to you developing your scaling mindset, your psyche, as we referenced in the context of our 10 principle ScaleX framework? The very first principle is psyche. And in the context of standing guard at the door of your own mind, I would encourage everyone, just to add to what you're saying, Claire, we've come from a mastermind this morning where we focused on psyche with the participants of our ScaleX Club, who were reporting so positively about the journey that they've been on in the last number of years and how they've switched a habit, let's say, of picking up their phone first thing in the morning when they're waking up and letting that negative news in, or immediately going to their email, getting dragged into the quagmire of emailing before they've even got out of their bed. Now they're listening to positive material, they're listening to the podcasts, they're reading positive books, and ultimately marinating in positive material, which is much more conducive to them bringing really positive energy into their workplace, to their teams, and living that kind of being that chief energy officer as opposed to the chief executive officer, is bringing that wonderful energy every day. So thank you for reaffirming the appeal for people to subscribe and share. I always come back to kind of thinking of things in numbers, leaning on my finance background, and I estimate somewhere between kind of $750,000 and $1 million for US listeners of value, should you contract those people that we bring onto this podcast to deliver a 1 hour keynote speech, which we have done in the past. We know the cost of investing in these people, and you're getting this material for free. So please share. There we go.
Yeah, so another great season. Season 11 was full of great guests, full of great practical takeaways. You did your second live conversation with James Watt, which was wonderful. How did that go for you?
I really enjoyed it. James welcomed me to his incredible Waterloo headquarters in London, and I spent the day with James and his team. Got to enjoy the slide that he has in the brewery there. He has his own podcast studio, and there was just, I got to experience an incredible, we talked about energy earlier, an incredible energy in the brewery amongst his team. I'd met lots of different team members throughout the day, and I know he has placed a huge emphasis on the development of his team, and I met team members independent of James that day, and you can certainly feel the culture that he is creating in the environment. So it was a real privilege, I have to say. It was like Disneyland for craft beer lovers. So hugely enjoyable.
Brilliant. So yeah, and I admitted to you earlier on, I had a favorite in the season this time, and it was Eric Jorgensen. I loved listening to Eric. It was very easy to listen to anyway, but there was a couple of things that really stood out in his interview. Apart from the fact that he thanked you for your measured curiosity, I love that. But he actually, there was lots of signs. You'll recall back in previous episodes whenever you have interviewed Ryan Gottfredson, and I go back to Ryan Gottfredson's work quite often, but when Ryan talks about the mindset of a 3.0 leader, and it's very much the mindset of contributing and giving back. And Eric talked about, there was a couple of real telltale signs in there of a mindset 3.0 leader. And he talked about, he wasn't scared to say that he was new to an industry and new to all of the processes. So therefore, he didn't feel tempted to make decisions that he didn't feel that he was qualified to make. And he also described the CEO role as a role where somebody simply needs to understand what the team needs and support them to make it happen. So lots of great signs there. Again, an exceptionally intelligent man. But I really enjoyed that, really enjoyed listening to him. Loved the fact that, he talked about his goal is to maintain his level of happiness as he works to fulfill the vision of Scribe, which is lovely. It actually took me to an old Ernest Hemingway quote, which I love. It says, "Happiness in intelligent people is the rarest thing I know." So Eric, I wish you well in that journey and hold on to that happiness as hard as you can. So
yeah, an incredibly clever guy who's written a book. I've been looking to speak with and wanting to speak with Eric for years. I'm a huge fan of his first book, The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which is just
I've heard you
packed.
talk about that for years.
Well, I would encourage people to go and pick it up, even if you don't know Naval Ravikant. You know, type into Google, you'll find out a little bit about this guy, and he is intriguing. And Eric, of course, spent years exploring, researching, condensing, bringing together the work of Naval Ravikant into a wonderful book packed with wisdom, and ultimately the takeaway for me from the conversation with Eric is that caution around deferring happiness to some future state. So whilst creating a vision for the future is so critically important, and leaning into that is critically important, be careful not to build in suffering if you're telling yourself that you will only be happy when certain goals within the context of the vision are realized.
Yeah. He actually said, because it was one of the key messages that I took out from the whole season, and he says, if you can't be happy with a cup of coffee in the morning or feeling the sun on your face, you won't be happy with a yacht. And it just reminds us of putting things in perspective and finding gratitude in the simple things. And as you said there, we often spoil what we have by thinking about what we want, and we can take that away. And it's often what we have right now is previously what we've yearned for, what we thought would make us happy. So actually stop and recognize what we've got right now and learn to find gratitude and happiness in that.
I think that could be the most profound thing you've ever said.
I am happy.
I'm going to replay that a lot. What a beautiful insight. I completely agree. Spoiling the moment we're in, which has been a previous past yearning for, by deferring the happiness in this moment because you're wanting something else.
Yes.
So profound.
It actually, you'll recall, it actually took me back to the conversation you had with Stephen Bartlett, and he talked about his first flight. And he was sitting in first class, something that he'd become very accustomed to. And a couple got on and they were gasping at, everything that was there in first class or business class, wherever he was sitting. And he recalled back to whenever he was feeling like that, and he didn't feel that anymore. So actually, I think that's something that we should all work really hard to protect and preserve. Those little moments of wonder.
Here.
Let's not lose those.
Brilliant. And I feel that was made even more profound in terms of not losing the focus of the moment whenever I spoke with Peter Cowley. And after an incredible conversation, he disclosed his personal journey right at the end. A guy who has it all, if in the context of business achievement, but is actually navigating through terminal cancer.
Yeah, 13.
Yeah. And his mindset back to psyche is so incredible. And he left us with that important timeless takeaway of, don't be sweating the small stuff. And the reality is, it's all small stuff.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting that you call that out, because you must find the same, but over previous episodes, there seems to be two views on that. Don't sweat the small stuff. Some people would see the don't sweat the small stuff as, focus on the bigger picture. And then other people would view don't sweat the small stuff as in don't overlook the important small details, because it's the important small details that actually make the difference. So, interesting.
Yeah, there's a contrast there, and I believe the insight in that is, you don't rise to the level of your desired performance. You fall to the standard of your processes and systems. It was James Clear who narrated that within his book Atomic Habits. The focus on the small things ultimately compound over time. But the point I believe, and certainly what resonates for me with Peter is enjoy that. You know, by all means, focus on the small things, but you don't have to sweat them, because ultimately this, when you're unwell, and it brings me back, I can't recall who quoted this, but you know, the well man has many goals, the unwell man has only one.
Yeah.
And Peter's journey is just a reminder of that. Peter's still a very active investor, but he's not impeding his happiness because an investment hasn't returned what he envisioned it would return at the outset. He's still going through the process, the due diligence process, to ensure that his investments have the highest probability of delivering him a return. But he's not enjoying the day if he receives news that this particular investment hasn't returned as he initially envisaged. And I think that's the interpretation of that.
I guess it's perspective, isn't it? It boils down to perspective. You know, as somebody who has partnered many CEOs on my own journey, you know, I've worked with the CEOs before who maybe at times have got bogged down in the small stuff, and some maybe have not seen the maybe the big burning platform, or the big thing that really requires their attention, or maybe, you know, rightly or wrongly, have chosen not to address it. So it's perspective. It's what is it's determining that thing that's going to require your attention, and it's not overlooking all the small details, as you say there, the building of the system that are going to enable you to rise higher and higher. But there are certain things, I guess, that are going to require your attention, like receiving you know, a terminal diagnosis. You know, I can't imagine what that would feel like. You know, a lot of things would feel insignificant.
And ultimately, we've seen through our own journey those leaders who can oscillate between crafting a vision of the future and inspiring themselves and others towards that vision of the future, and ensuring that that informs what they're doing this month, this week, today, as a navigational point of reference in terms of, well, we're not going this way, we're going this way, because that's the vision that we've set. Those are the coordinates that we've put in the context of the company journey that we're on. And that helps inform the direction of travel today. And the best leaders can oscillate between they know when it's time to roll the sleeves up and get down, to focus on the smaller elements of executing on the vision, but they never lose sight of the vision. And they can, as I say, they can oscillate between that big picture and ultimately what's required today in the context of that big picture. But what we also find in terms of those who struggle with this is that they get caught in the activity trap of the day to day, without actually taking a perspective and creating context around why this is important in relation to an overall vision.
Yeah.
The importance of envisioning came up quite a bit throughout this season. John Rhodes has devoted his career to it through his functional imagery training program. Nancy Duarte talked about the importance of going away, crafting your vision, coming back in and communicating that, of course, with empathy. What were some of the emerging themes for you in this season?
Yeah, I just picking up on that point, and I thought it was really worth highlighting that John Rhodes also made the really clear distinction between visioneering and imagineering. So visioneering, something which, you know, uses all those seven senses to really help us to feel it, and be it, you know, in the future. But imagineering is around creating something completely new. So I thought that was really worth highlighting. But So the themes, I'm afraid I have to drop the S off the word themes. There was one absolutely overwhelming theme this season, and it actually started to make me think maybe you had selected these people all intentionally, but it was performance. It was all around accelerating performance within our business, and kicking off, Daniel Priestley spoke about it around accelerating performance with lead generation and, building up that supply and demand tension. Evan Ryan talked about it with AI. Lovely take on AI. Really, really loved that interview. But he talked about using AI to strip out the mundane so that we could focus on the performance of our processes. Adam Coffey and Peter Cowley, they addressed performance as well whenever they're talking about using financial investment through PE primarily to fuel the financial performance of our business. Mornay Smith, he talked about performance as well. He referred to the creation of the sales playbook and the developing the high performing sales culture. I've not done there either, because Elliot Rowe and John Rhodes also, they both referred to the high performance mindset and identifying those self-limiting beliefs that might impact our performance. And then, of course, the wonderful James Watt, he talked about building the high performing team. So every single interview, be it all of those people, be it even Nancy talking about communicating with impact to elevate our performance, I found they all spoke to the performance theme, certainly within the ScaleX framework. They were all pulling onto how we accelerate performance, both financially and operationally, to implement and ultimately perform more effectively.
Claire, I'm going to get you to recap this again, because this triggers in me the formula or the algorithm which Timothy Galway, a lot of the listeners will be aware of, the book The Inner Game of Tennis, which is a book that focuses on the sport of tennis, but ultimately it's about coaching us in the context of developing a mindset conducive to high performance in whatever discipline, be it in the workplace, be it in the sports field, whatever. And the formula is performance equals potential minus interference. So what you've referenced in all of the episodes is the fact that there's interference that exists in our working environments, and these guests have really honed in on how you kind of remove that. Daniel Priestley, if we go back, he talks about everything is downstream from lead generation. One of the greatest challenges in so many of our SME businesses is their challenge around attracting new business, and they get bogged into kind of the features, or overly bogged down into the features of their product or the elements of their service, whenever actually the first interaction any customer will ever have with you is your marketing. And everything comes downstream from those lead generation activities. So the interference is almost getting distracted with some of the detail around your product or service, when the reality is you should be focused on lead generation and not letting other things interfere with that. Evan Ryan, as you mentioned, a lot of interference happens when great people within your businesses with huge potential are being bogged down into doing mundane, routine, monotonous tasks. And he brings a lovely perspective in the context of how AI can be that free teammate for everyone, for every business listening, to do some of those mundane tasks, to remove that interference, that energy interference, which is that kind of monotonous, task-based focus that impedes or chokes high potential within our teams. Adam Coffey referred to the interference essentially being the cash to fuel our business. And he's saying there's another alternative here. It's called private equity. And there are wonderful private equity partners there. There is lots of money in the system that is looking for a great home in the context of your business, which can help remove that interference of cash challenges. So I'm kind of indulging myself here with this formula, which I love.
I love I love the formula as well. And actually what it really shines a light on is how we define interference. I think of interference, back in the old days where you had that fuzzy TV and there was interference in the background and it was just plain old annoying. But actually, sometimes interference is doing things which we think are normal and we think are the right things to do without ever challenging, is there a different way? Is there a better way? Like before AI came, we didn't really understand if there was a better way to, I don't know, write a social post or create a presentation or it's allowing yourself to have that curiosity to explore new things without actually having that fixed mindset to say this is how I do it and this is how it's done.
I love that, and the metaphor of the channel, and for listeners of a certain age, you will recall flicking over and seeing that fuzzy TV, that black and white fuzz, and then pressing the channel and seeing a wonderful, crisp, clear picture that just kind of immediately invokes a great feeling inside. And John Rhodes talked about changing the channel, the one that's currently interfering with the vision that you want for your business, for your team, for you. You have the ability to change the channel.
That's right.
And
One of my favorite takeaways, he talked about we have the remote control, so it's completely within our own power.
absolutely. Which brings us then to Elliot Rowe and his deep insight into the limiting beliefs which are buried deeply within us. And really, the journey of scaling personally and professionally is about discerning what's empowering us and what is actually interference. You mentioned, Claire, earlier, a lot of us do things because we've always done them. And I thought it was a frightening statistic when John Rhodes shared that 95% of what we do on a day-to-day basis is habitual. It's automatic. It's coming from our subconscious, habitually programmed mind, as opposed to operating within the 5%, which is the conscious thinking mind. And we know that if we want to bring anything into existence, we must consciously think about that before it actually happens.
Well, I can't remember the statistics, but what did he mention about what percentage of the thoughts that we have every day we have had yesterday?
80% of our thoughts are negative. Sorry, 80% of the thoughts are repeated from the previous day, and 60 to 80% of those are negative. Our thoughts are largely negative thoughts, which is frightening. So we're just kind of living in this loop of the past. And, it's something that we encourage, certainly through our own coaching, through our own program, for people to really focus on their thinking, to think about their thinking, understanding that everything, for you listening right now, if you're in the car, if you're in the gym, if you're at home doing some work, anything that you're touching or experiencing right now as you listen to this podcast has been preceded with a conscious thought. Somebody somewhere has had to think about what it is that you're enjoying right now, including the podcast medium, including the software which enables this, including the technology which has allowed us to host this conversation right now. So really thinking about your thinking, for me, came loud and clear in those episodes with Elliot and with John Rhodes in the context of performance.
Yeah, I would actually go back to that that formula: potential equals performance minus interference. And actually would encourage listeners to think about themselves and think about their business and actually start to think about what potentially could that interference be.
Yeah, yeah. And I encourage everyone to pick up that book, The Inner Game of Tennis. Don't be put off if you don't play tennis. There are only a couple of chapters that talk about your backswing, but it's essentially an understanding of your conscious mind versus your unconscious, and how a lot of our lives, much of our lives, is being directed by our unconscious minds.
Brilliant.
Claire, in terms of messages that captured your curiosity, was there anything else that kind of jumped out at you?
Yeah, there was quite a few actually. First one I'm going to touch on is from Elliot Rowe, and he talked about we often suffer from fear of failure, but also he threw something new into the mix, which we don't hear much of, and that is we often suffer from the fear of success. And he talked about sometimes that we can be afraid of being too successful, whereby we start to shift the social dynamics between our family and our friends. And therefore, we stop doing what we really want to do for the fear that that will happen. And I guess that's probably driven by our kind of in-depth sense of our wants and needs to feel that we belong. So yeah, it's just something that we don't often hear very often, or we don't talk about it very often, is a fear of success.
Yeah, I found that fascinating because
Yeah.
it's so contrarian to everything else that you hear in terms of fear of judgment or fear of failure. Why would anyone fear success? But if you're in an environment where surrounded by people, and it may be an environment you've grown up in, surrounded by people who you have come to know and love and are part of your friendship group, and you begin to do things differently, you're successful in a material sense. All of a sudden you've got things that others may not have. We talk about it, slagging in this part of the world, or banter. Very quickly you're going to listen to things like, as we hear it in this, who does he think he is? He's got too big for his boots. All of those things which play into our own psyche and ultimately prevent us from performing optimally in the context of back to that interference again. So it's being really mindful about the environment that you're actually in. Is it conducive to an environment that is success in the context of how you define it?
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. It's I thought that was interesting from Elliot Rowe. Another message which I loved from Mornay Smith. I have to tell you this. I was actually listening to Mornay's lovely South African accent whenever I was sitting in the West Coast. I had a visit to see my brother last week in South Africa, and I was sitting on the West Coast in this beautiful little old fishing village called Paternoster, and I was had the wind in my hair. I was sitting in the all surrounded by white walls, looking out over the Atlantic, listening to Mornay Smith's lovely South African accent in my ear. But that wasn't the message that stuck with me. It was he talked about 50% of the success of a sales team rides on first of all finding that great person, but 50% of the success depends on what we do with them whenever they join us. And I think that last 50% is often overlooked. And it actually really got me thinking, there's a story that will never leave me in my career. And I remember having to jump on a plane to go to meet with a salesperson, and I had to have a conversation to part company with them. And I will never forget what he said to me in that conversation. And you'll have to excuse my French here a little bit, but he said to me, Claire, just because you pay me the big bucks doesn't mean that I shit diamonds. Excuse me. But and I just, that never left me, because I thought, okay, so the company at that time had paid a lot of money to bring him in, but the 50% of success that Mornay referred to about what we need to do to coach them, to nurture them, to check in, to make sure that they are totally clear on what they're accountable for, all of those little bits around the support that somebody needs, regardless of, how much you've had to pay to bring them in, it doesn't go away. And that was a real lesson for me. So I love that message. I love that Mornay called that out to say, don't invest 100% of your time around getting the right processes to bring the right person in if you're not going to do the same around investing your attention into creating the right processes to support them.
Yeah, it speaks loudly to our own coaching in this regard, in the context of the people principle and people and performance. Our sixth principle is ensuring you have the right jockeys aligned to your values and your overall culture. The right jockeys on the right horse, the horse in this context being the role that they're actually playing, running the right race in the context of a scaling business, the region that they're in or the sector that they're playing in. So the right jockey on the right horse running the right race is so critically important, again, in the overall context of performance. And what really struck me from the conversation with Mornay was, again, the importance of understanding there's a difference between the hunters, the closers, the foragers, and I've certainly been guilty of the past feeling compelled to promote someone, taking a subject matter expert, a wonderful salesperson, let's say a wonderful closer, who is very much operating as a lone wolf, but just wonderful in that role. And because they're performing so well in that role, you feel compelled to reward them. And what do? We put them into these managerial roles and give them 3 or 4 or 5 people to manage, as well as their existing sales target. And when you speak to it like that, you realize the folly of that. But I have been guilty of that so often in the past, because we're trying to reward people in this old paradigm of what people believe a company structure looks like, is this hierarchical structure, and you come in at this level and you move up to this level and you move up to this level, when the reality is, break that entire structure and just reward people by giving them more opportunities to do what they're brilliant at doing.
Yes. And speaking of reward, I've never come across that before, but I absolutely loved how he presented the compensation. Give people a choice. And the choice actually reveals a lot about everything, their confidence levels, how they view their own capability. And actually, he was very honest and said, if somebody comes to me and says that they actually want to sit down and review the compensation, it's a conversation that he's willing to have. But, up front, I love that, just giving people an option.
And this is where the vision becomes so critically important. We talk about the power of the vivid vision document, having that clarity in the direction of travel that you as the leader want to take this business, understanding and being clear that you don't have all the answers, but this person has presented themselves as someone with competencies that may support the execution of the vision. And to just hand that document to this person, say, this is where I want to go. Now, how can you articulate and demonstrate that you're going to take us closer to this? And how do you feel you should be rewarded when you do?
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Letting people come up with their own compensation.
Absolutely. So there's, which ultimately is what he was alluding to. He talked about the 3 different options, but essentially giving people a choice. Say, look, here's where we're going now. If you're going to back yourself, what are you going to do to take us there, and how do you deem you should be rewarded as a result of getting us there?
I think the guaranteed and the non-guaranteed element it was a is a real scale of showing us how confident they really are.
Completely agree.
Which no, I love that. I love that message, and I think I think was it John Rhodes also said. And something you and I often talk about is that 50-50 split of challenge and support, and how important that is. It was actually really interesting that John Rhodes brought it up again, and it's so always making sure that you balance out. Challenge hard, but equally you've got to be right behind someone to let them know that you're there should they need you.
Anything else that piqued your curiosity before we move on?
Yeah, I'm gonna a key message that Adam Coffey actually shared, and I loved what he said. The question he asked: would you rather own 100% of a grape, or 1% of a truck full of 100 grapes? And what he was talking about was giving away ownership or equity of your company there. But equally, he also talked about the high percentage of entrepreneurs. 73% of entrepreneurs who bring in private equity don't survive the first 5 year holding period. But I thought Adam gave really good, solid advice. So, as an entrepreneur or a business owner who's considering bringing in private equity, with that high percentage of entrepreneurs who don't make it, you're essentially giving away your control. That's going to have impact on everything. On your family, on your mental health, everything. If you're asked to step back from your own business. However, I think his advice around doing your own due diligence into the private equity company that you engage with was absolutely 100%. And in particular, not everything goes right, and actually starting to explore how these people behave whenever things go wrong, and do they behave in a fair manner, and do they allow people to have dignity through the process. And Adam wasn't shy to say that ultimately people are what matters, and how you treat people are what matters. And I think that is actually, for any private equity companies out there listening to this, I think that is absolutely key. So, yeah, I love that message.
Yeah, I also loved Adam's view on unit economics, and he said if you can't make a profit at the smallest unit, scaling up only magnifies the problem. And he gave us his little slide rule, in the context again of performance and minimum performance as he expects it. He talked about the 30-20-10 rule, and every company at a minimum should aim for 30% gross profit, no more
Yes.
than 20% sales, general and admin, and which ultimately will deliver 10% minimum net profit. And I like that, the simplicity of that 30-20-10 rule, which really resonated with me going back to the early days of our own scaling journey
Yeah.
in our previous role. And
Yes, get the basics working well.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Which brings me back to another point, that if it's chaos, if performance is chaos in the context of you're not delivering bottom line results right now, to embark on a scaling journey at that stage, really you're only ever going to scale chaos. So the 30-20-10 focus, bringing you back to unit economics, I thought was so simple but profound. So again, remember, simple scales, complex fails. Keep it simple.
Yeah, there you go. And actually bringing it back to process and systems. And it reminds me of Adam also talked about, billionaires don't have a special gene. And I love that. And actually, one thing that probably irks me a little bit is that people have an absolute obsession with the likes of the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks of the world, and trying to absolutely analyze what it is they do or how they behave that has made them so successful. But it's extracting the processes that work and actually having the discipline and the persistence and the courage and the dedication to keep showing up and applying those day in, day out. And I think Adam made that point really well. You know, it's pe- you know, who cares if Jeff Bezos sleeps upside down or what Elon Musk eats for breakfast? It's finding out what works and then making it accessible to everybody, as many people as
And
possible.
I feel, without this sounding like a plug for our own work, but essentially that's what we have aimed to do with our own book, Simple Scaling, where we've defined the 10 principles of scaling. And you talk about, I don't care whether Jeff Bezos sleeps upside down, you know, from a personal performance, a personal health and well-being performance. There's an obsession out there with hacks, and I've tried lots of different things as well, but I've come back to the fundamentals, the principles of good health and well-being, which are sleep, exercise, nutrition, self-care, and your environment. Get those right, and really, you know, you're 99% of the way there to wonderful health and great well-being. And then start hacking, start the biohacking. And I feel it's similar in the context of scaling a business,
Yeah,
where, you know, there's so much out there in the context of scaling, but actually bring it back to the base principles. You know,
yeah,
I speak to audiences, um, you know, across the country, and talk about, you know, Google how to scale a business, and it returns back more than 1 billion search results. How do you weed through all of that? But there are core fundamentals, there are core principles, which Adam has reaffirmed certainly in his episode. I encourage people to go back and listen to that again. So,
definitely,
Claire,
definitely.
anything else before we move into the close? Anything else that really piqued your curiosity, really struck a chord?
One last message, and Daniel Priestley encouraged all of us to expand our surface area of luck. And I just loved that. It really stood out. And he talked about, you know, if we're going to sit at home and watch Netflix or do whatever, you know, our surface area of luck, as he described it, is greatly reduced. And even every interaction we have with people, every time we leave the house, could be expanding our surface area of luck. So just reinforce the importance of really expanding our network, I guess, and meeting new people, going to new places, and just yeah, sharing your vision, sharing your purpose with as many people as you can. So, and not being tempted to sit in front of the TV. So, love that. Really enjoyed
Yeah,
it.
he cited another maxim by which he lives by, which is the fact that somebody woke up this morning with the solution to your problem. You
Love
just have
that.
to go and find them.
That's
So, you
right.
know, if you're looking new business, if sales is your challenge, there is someone out there on this planet amongst the 8 billion of us who needs what you're doing. You just have to find them. They need right now what it is that you're offering. If you're cash strapped, there are, back to Adam Kofi's episode, there are suitable partners that are going to support you right now and support your ambition to scale. You just have to find them. They've got the cash, you just have to find them. But somebody woke up this morning with the solution to your current challenge.
Yeah.
The journey of scaling is finding those people, finding the who's for the how, going back to a previous episode with Dan Sullivan.
Yeah.
I'm keen to explore what you're going to do differently as a result of this season. But before I do, how has progress been with your commitment from the last season?
Well, I kind of wish you didn't ask me that because I'm slowing down a little bit and I need to pull my socks up. My last commitment from season 10 was I took on board Dan Sullivan's advice, and he encouraged all of us to look back over the last year, so 2023, and split my days between free days, focus days, and buffer days. And I have to say, I haven't finished that yet. I did start it, but I haven't finished it yet. And I also still have work to do to, I talked about contacting 10 people to ask for their help in defining my unique ability. So I'm still putting myself on the hook for those. I'm not going to let myself off the hook. Those are still coming. Um, but this episode, I'm actually going to take a bit of advice from Nancy Duarte. And I really loved her episode. And it was around her third timeless takeaway. And she talked about, to be good at communicating and to be good at presentations, we need to practice. And I think she talked about a communication coach. So I'm going to book time with a communication coach. I'm just going to do that. So I put myself on the hook for that. You and I both had the pleasure of standing up in front of 500 odd people last November at our first ScaleX Summit. And I dare say we'll be doing it again in the near future. So to get even better at doing that and more comfortable doing it, as you mentioned actually during one of the podcast episodes, that public speaking is often a fear considered, or a fear worse than death. Not quite there, but it doesn't come, I guess, I'm not overly comfortable with it. I'm not sure anybody is, but I can certainly get better at it. So that's my commitment this time. So recap on Dan, sorry, not recap. Complete Dan Sullivan's exercise. Continue to explore my unique ability, and also to book time with a communication coach.
Well, I'm going to hold you accountable because there's a backlog of commitments there starting to build up. So, but I look forward to hearing and watching your progress with the communication coach. I'm looking forward with certainly with a keen interest, because it's something that I need to also develop in terms of hosting the podcast and doing more public speaking. So, and I think it's certainly what I've taken from Nancy and many of the guests that we've had on the show. You can have a wonderful idea, but if you can't communicate that idea, it ultimately will go to your deathbed with you. Yeah. So that ability to communicate is such a critical component, is such a critical trait of scaling leaders, successful scaling leaders.
Daniel Priestley also reminded us that the market doesn't care if we don't feel comfortable.
Exactly. Become that key person of influence in your industry. Yeah. So you mentioned, you referenced Nancy Duarte's timeless takeaway, but can you share with us, is it going to feature in your 3 favorite takeaways from this season?
It's actually not. I have 3 different timeless takeaways that I have selected. First one being Evan Ryan's. He'd said, companies grow because the team grows, not because of AI. AI will save us time and enable this to happen more quickly. So I think he gave a nice refreshing view of AI. There is a fear about AI and what will happen. And I think for certainly all we know about AI right now and how we can use it is to help us to strip away the mundane and help us to be more creative, higher performing. So let's use AI right now for to make us better. And actually to help us grow and to help the teams grow. So love that, really enjoyed that. Second one then was Peter Cowley. To work out post-trauma, how to grow from it. And I think we've all got maybe our own way of defining trauma. And, I think trauma can be defined as a significant change in life, something that has been presented to us. It could be a breakup. It could be something unexpected that has happened in our lives. Not maybe not as extreme as what Peter Cowley is dealing with himself. But trauma could be defined as something maybe that has happened in our lives that we haven't expected it to have, and work out what we can take away from that, what we can learn from it, what we can do differently, the lessons it's trying to teach us. So I thought that was a really good takeaway, and certainly something that we can all do more of. And then finally, the third takeaway, my favorite takeaway, was John Rhodes. We talked about it earlier on, and it was we have the opportunity to change our narrative. We have the remote control. So let's all ask ourselves, what are we doing with it? So, three great timeless takeaways there.
Love that. Well, great advice for everyone. I love the metaphor of having the remote control. So my appeal to everyone in terms of practical takeaways from today's wrap-up episode is to examine what interference might be in the context of your own scaling journey, and is it time to take the remote control and change the channel. Claire, as ever, look, thank you
Wonderful.
so much for your time today. It's flown as ever. I will see you again at the start of summer. I wish you a wonderful spring, and look forward to catching up again to learn a little bit more about your progress against your commitments. So
Well,
take
I look
care.
forward to it. Thank you very much.